Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about holiday depression. It affects many people, and we have with us two people from Centerstone, Dr. Karen Ray, the Chief Medical Officer at Centerstone, and Lisa Egabine, Director of Crisis Management and Suicide Prevention. Let's go to the phones. Lucy. Hello, Lucy.
Hey, y'all. How you doing? I just want to say that y'all are covering this topic very well tonight. I've run into this a lot over the years with people, but the seasonal affective disorder, that's a real thing. That is a very real thing, and people don't realize how real it is. Even if I'm feeling a little energy low, I go outside for at least 15 minutes to try to get some sunlight, and it makes me feel much better. So it's a real thing. But what I want to ask about is, or address, it's like with the elderly. A lot of elderly people don't have people around them. And I want to know if you think that there's a difference between depression, or, you know, holiday depression, or people who are elderly, or not just elderly maybe, but people who are extremely lonely. To me, I don't consider loneliness as depression, but, you know, some people can't cope with being alone or lonely, you know, and they think that they're depressed or something. You know what I'm trying to say?
Right.
Can you address that? I'm going to hang up and take your comments off the air.
Lucy, thank you for that. What do you think about what she's saying there?
Well, I think the first thing is that many elderly people are predisposed to being depressed because their brains do not produce the neurotransmitters in the same way. So it's really partly the biology, you know, whether it runs in your family or not. As you get older, it's easier to be depressed. And I do agree with her that not everyone who's lonely is depressed. But I think being alone is a terrible stressor in the holidays, particularly. And I guess I want to applaud her for being concerned about people who really don't have a support network.
What do you think about what she's talking about there? Loneliness, depression, are they same, different?
Right. I would say that loneliness is more of a risk factor for depression than anything, you know. But I know that, you know, kind of going back to her discussion around, or question around, misuse of the word depression, I think oftentimes we may have a depressed day and talk about feeling or being depressed. And there's a very real difference between a depressed day, just having, you know, a really bad one, versus having depression, which means it's a longer term major change in how we engage in life versus how we did previously.
Right. Okay, let's go to Christine. Hello, Christine.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
I talked to you last year during this, I think.
You did. Well, thank you.
I have lost 3 of my children. I only had 4, and I've lost 3 of them, 2 in 1 year. And I want to tell the people out there that, you know, when you have somebody that's lost a loved one, and you think, well, I'd call them today, but I'm afraid that maybe they're not upset, and maybe they're not thinking about that person. But we think about them every day, and it really means a lot. I have such a family support, nieces and nephews that call to see that I'm okay during this season. But I'd like to tell you that with God's help, you can get through the season. And I know people are saying, well, you know what, I've lost a child, and I realize that, and the first one is really hard to get through. But, you know, just trust in God, and be sure you call that person and let them know each day that you're thinking of them, and that if they want to talk about that person, they'll say, well, maybe if we don't mention it, she won't think of them.
Right.
But we think of them every day. God bless you, and have a blessed season.
Well, thank you. Thank you for calling and for sharing that. And what do you think about what she's saying there?
I think what she said is amazing. She understands how to get through that, and she's obviously she has a loving heart.
And that losing a child is obviously for me, incomprehensibly, it's devastating. And so you're talking about, are you inclined to be depressed, or something terrible like that happens, that no matter what that inclination is, it would seemingly throw you into a depression.
Well, I think there is that difference, and it's sometimes subtle, between grief and depression. So, people who go into depression as part of their grief tend to, again, have the problems with sleep, with appetite, with energy, and sometimes ideas that they really don't want to continue on. Whereas people who are grief-stricken certainly cry, they're very focused on the person they've lost, but there is that subtle transition that we always need to be looking for.
So there is a difference between grief and depression.
Yeah. There is, but it's more a continuum. It isn't, there's this one and then that one. It sort of shades into the depression.
I applaud her additionally for encouraging people to talk about some of the difficult topics. It's as culturally not necessarily so acceptable to ask how somebody is doing, after the funeral, after the dust has settled around grief and loss. The same is true, we know, around suicidality. We often don't want to use the word suicide or ask somebody if they're having those thoughts. And so we miss that opportunity to have a real, honest discussion with somebody about how they're doing and how we might be able to help them.
Our culture, we're very independent. I'm talking our U.S. culture. Are we more inclined to depression than other cultures? Let's take Europe. Let's take, I don't know, the Far East. What about other cultures? Are we more inclined or not? Or is there study on that?
Well, there's studies. It is a bit complicated because we have the difference in who has the northernmost location versus being near the equator. We also have some differences in the way that psychiatric illnesses are diagnosed, and we know that they tend to be similar in industrialized countries and are less diagnosed and treated in countries that are more rural. So there is a bit of a difference, but it's certainly a worldwide phenomenon.
And what do you think about that?
I would agree absolutely with everything that Karen said. I don't know.
I wonder if it's more our. So it's not just more our problem. It's everywhere.
Right.
And what I do know is our inclination toward medication, and it's very positive in many ways to recognize you have a problem. It can be treated medically, but at the same time also there's concern on the part of over-medication, that there's just too much of that. And so how do we make that balance?
I think the issue is that generally there are many more people with depression than those who are getting treated. So that's the first. It's a problem with identification of people who are ill, who need intervention. I think the other thing is that medicine alone is often not adequate. So psychotherapy, talk therapy is really an important part of the treatment. Trying to arrange the support for the person is very important. Making sure that other medical illnesses are getting treated really matters. Trying to work on, again, sleeping and adequate dietary intake and activity, as well as social interaction.
And recognizing that there's not always that immediate gratification, I think, is also important. As Karen noted, some of these things that she's talking about and encouraging take time to kind of build up and get you to a point where you're feeling better over time. Going back to that cultural aspect, we very much want the immediate gratification. So making sure that we're acknowledging that this may be a process that we have to go to get to the place that we were previously and feeling better.
And you talk about support, and we saw in our last call there with Christine, she talked about religion, she talked about God or church. Where does that fit in? Religion and a church family in combating some of these issues. Where does that fit in? I'll start with you.
Sure. Spirituality is a major protective factor, meaning that it helps to keep us safe over time. And so specifically with depression, it can help to kind of combat some of those depressive symptoms. But we also know that suicidality is combated pretty substantially by spirituality as one of those positive protective factors.
Okay.
I think on the other side of that, we are losing some of the spirituality in our culture. We're also losing being near our family of origin. So people are moving to California from Tennessee, so they lose the support network. Their spiritual life often becomes disrupted. So there are a number of stressors that we really have to work hard to combat for people who are depressed.
Do you think we're a more isolated society or a more connected society now? And you mentioned over and over that this sense of connectedness is so important. And we have things like social media and all these things that keep us connected in ways that were unimaginable not that long ago. But do they promote isolation or do they promote connectedness? And I'll let you both answer that. I'm interested in that. What do you think?
I think they promote both. So,
well, that's a good answer.
Well, no, I think it is a connection of a type. On the other hand, many people really value the face-to-face interaction. And it's possible to have 1,000 friends online, but not have the one that you can really talk to. So it kind of cuts both ways.
And the depth of the relationships is important as well. We're a hi, how are you society when the correct response back is, I'm doing great. But when you speak with your friends, do they respond in the same sort of way? Would you respond in the same sort of way? The depth of the relationship is incredibly important. We don't necessarily have that in those online communications.
So it's not about the number of people. It is a depth. It is a need to speak honestly, not superficially, about how you're feeling.
Well, I think, again, it's an individual issue.
Right.
Many people do well with large numbers of friends. Many of us like large parties, and others like to have a few really close friends. And so it's back to the individual.
Okay, let's go to Mel. Hello, Mel.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
I think I have a comment and maybe a question both, but I have been through depression, and certain members of my family have, and I can look back in the history, let's say 30 or 40 years, and it seems like our country in general was brimming with idealism, and now it's not. And we're seeing more depression, and so I think there's a strong connection between ideas and how we feel, and that's not being discussed as much as it used to be. Now it's all about genetics, but I know that I get out of my depression by thinking thoughts that make me feel better, and so has members of my family.
And you think there are fewer of those? It's easier to surround yourself and
we're not brimming with the enthusiasm as a country, as a world. There's more hopelessness. There's more powerlessness, and there's a lack of enthusiasm. And so I'm saying that I think the subjective aspects of our identity have a lot to do with how we feel objectively.
Okay, interesting. What do you both think of that? What do you think?
Well, first off, I would say thank you, Mel, for being so brave as to come on and share a bit of your story. You know, one of the things that I liked about what he was sharing is that his thoughts help to pull him out of that depression. What we know in terms of psychotherapy and what Karen had alluded to previously is that there's plenty of evidence-based methods out there that help to decrease depressive symptoms, and one that Mel was speaking kind of very briefly about is cognitive behavioral therapy, which shows to be beneficial over time.
Cognitive behavioral therapy, what is that? That's when you think good thoughts. Is that right? I've said it wrong, that's not right.
No, it's good enough.
You control, well, you should try and control your thoughts, and when you reinforce positive feelings and thoughts, then that can only have a positive impact.
You often behave in a more positive way. And
what do you think, Dr. Ray, about what he's saying? He's saying our society in general is less positive, and he's saying it's a societal thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we have a much better appreciation of how complicated the world is, how complex the issues are, and how hard it is to solve the problems that we face. And honestly, the internet, our fantastic media explosion, both have they have a tremendous amount to do with our appreciation of how challenging life can be. And so I think I agree with him that there is less optimism, and people are a bit more puzzled and concerned about how we address problems on the other side of the globe, so to speak.
I mean, you often hear people say you are what you eat, right? You're also what you consume, what you watch. And if you are constantly filling your head with negative thoughts, images, these scary sorts of pronunciations that are on many channels, that can only have a negative impact. Okay, we have to take a break. We will take a break. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Back right after this.